Hear me out. Guns. Virtual guns are great, but what's even better are virtual guns with friends. Not to be confused with virtually gunning down friends. That's completely different.
Pick him up. Pick him up.
Oh, yo. Okay, watch it, dude. You're starting to
Hey, I didn't blow that up. Somebody actually shot that on their way over.
Guns, friends, co-op shooters, Battlestar Galactica. When you think of a co-op shooter, you might think of Left 4 Dead. It's a classic, super simple, great times all around. The question is, why haven't there been more? Left 4 Dead 2 came out in 2009, and since then there's been a few attempts to try and recapture what made those games so great. Not as many as you might think, but we do have Payday, GTFO, Dark Tide, Back 4 Blood. One of these is trying to capture the Left 4 Dead vibes much stronger than the others. Folks might have their own favorites, but for my money, you really can't beat a little game called Deep Rock Galactic. While many of the titles I've listed try to recapture the Left 4 Dead formula in a new light, oftentimes that magic gets lost as you stack more and more gameplay mechanics onto the simple premise. That's not necessarily a bad thing. These games have followings for a reason. They've taken the co-op shooter in a direction that many people like, but it's hard to deny that as they move towards their own unique ideas, more and more of that Left 4 Dead fairy dust is lost. In comes Deep Rock Galactic, along with another twist on the formula. This time though, instead of pushing the game in a certain direction, the added mechanics infuse the simplistic formula. But let's back up for a moment, because in order to understand the glue that holds Deep Rock together, you have to understand the stuff being held together. I started this video focused on the guns, so let's talk about that. You've got 4 classes to choose from: the Scout, the Engineer, the Gunner, and the Driller, each with their own primary and secondary weapons. The Scout and the Engineer have small arms for their primaries and heavy weapons for their secondaries, while the Driller and the Gunner have the opposite. There's no sense in going through each one individually, that sounds super boring. So let's just jump around and I'll show you a few things that you can do with these weapons. First off, weapon feel. This is the most important thing to get right with a shooter, but nowadays I'd say most games get this right. Weapons deal a good amount of damage, even on the higher difficulties. They sound great, and there's a really good feedback in terms of recoil and muzzle flash. Overall, rock solid gunplay. Pun definitely intended. What makes the weapons more than just shooty bang bangs are the upgrade trees and overclocks. Each weapon in Deep Rock is mostly a shell to start with. They all feel unique right out of the gate, but the upgrade trees and overclocks can not only fine-tune your weapon's performance, but in some cases they can actually completely change the way a weapon is used. The fine-tuning comes mostly from the upgrade trees, or gear modifications. This is something you'll have immediately available, and as you level up each class, you'll be able to work your way down this tree. These are often more damage, more ammo, extra shock or fire damage, stuff like that. This alone lets you configure a weapon to fit your needs. Take the Stubby, for instance, a shock submachine gun on the Engineer. There's a few ways to set this up. If you like the shock part of the weapon, you can double down on it and have the shock apply more often and spread to surrounding enemies. It's also a fairly accurate weapon for how fast it fires, so maybe instead of getting more out of the shock, you want to get more out of the weak point damage and rate of fire to really chew through some of those tougher enemies. That's the baseline weapon modifications, but where things really get interesting are the overclocks. After you promote any dwarf, which in Call of Duty terms is prestiging a dwarf, you'll be able to unlock and use overclocks. There are 3 kinds of overclocks: green, yellow, and red. Greens give a small boost with no downsides, yellows give bigger upsides but a slight drawback, and reds yield the highest highs but the lowest lows. Green overclocks are great if you want your weapon to be better, but not different. Yellows and reds are my personal favorites since they often give a new feature to the weapon. The flamethrower's fire sticks to surfaces. If you really enjoy that aspect of the weapon, you could use the green overclock, Sticky Additive, giving you a small boost to the duration of those sticky flames, as well as a bit of increased damage because why not? But maybe that's not enough for you. Maybe you want to go all the way with the sticky flames. Well, the red overclock sticky fuel will give you a huge boost to your sticky flame duration, as well as a huge increase to the damage of your sticky flames. This comes at the cost of magazine size and reserve ammo capacity though, so you'll really want to let those lingering flames do the heavy lifting. There's plenty more overclocks in Deep Rock, and combining them with the weapon upgrade trees give you a lot of freedom with how you want to set up your weapons and what you want them to do. 3 primary and secondary weapons per class isn't a lot of sheer weaponry, but the amount of customizability. The amount of options you have for each weapon makes it feel like there's way more weapons than there actually are. Each time you get one of these overclocks, you're unlocking a whole new potential playstyle. If you've been around the channel for, 2 minutes, you'll know that I'm a pretty avid Destiny player. This progression here with Deep Rock Galactic is a very similar style to Destiny, where you're combining different perks and equipment to create your own playstyle. You're getting stronger, and as such the missions are getting easier, but it's not just because you're dealing more damage. You're improving your dwarf through new effects and features that don't just make you better, they strengthen a certain playstyle. Progression is only the first half of what makes Deep Rock so enjoyable and replayable. The second half are the missions themselves. There's quite a few mission types, from escorting a drill, to repairing robots, to my personal favorite, building oil pipes, because, yeah, I'm an American. The missions are quite varied, but ultimately they're the same each time you do them. What makes them different every time is the cave they're in. The studio behind Deep Rock wrote up a pretty interesting little article giving some insight into how these caves are generated. But as far as how all this development mumbo-jumbo translates in-game, well, really well actually. You'll often see familiar architecture as you log more and more hours, but it's never quite the same. Those differences make a big deal when it comes to the mission objectives. It changes how you lay down those oil pipes, it changes how you approach a dreadnought fight. Most importantly though, it changes your movement. Well, maybe not movement so much as traversal. The word movement comes to mind, and I think of games like Titanfall, Echo Point Nova. Games where you're fast, you're agile, you can basically fly. In Deep Rock, you can't fly. Ignore those. Because you're a dwarf, you're short and stocky, and your movement will reflect that. It's a pretty stock, pun intended, standard movement system. Stock standard. Pun intended. You can walk, you can run, you can jump, and you can fling yourself off a ledge for a pseudo double jump. That's all well and good, but those capabilities aren't enough to get you to those higher ledges and platforms, which is where the classes come in. They all have their own unique equipment and traversal tools. The traversal tool is what makes Deep Rock special though. Instead of giving the player the innate ability to conquer any obstacle quickly and alone, it's now a team exercise. The scout is a one-size-fits-all, but his grappling hook only gets him somewhere. You've got 3 other dwarves to worry about. The engineer has a platform gun, which not only allows you to create staircases and bridge gaps, but it also works as a great tool for getting your turrets into a good vantage point. The driller gets drills, which is great for getting the team through obstacles, but having a tool dedicated to environmental manipulation really allows for a wide range of uses, like digging a bunker to funnel a particularly difficult swarm down a hallway. The gunner at first may seem like the weakest link, with the zipline launcher often feeling like a poor man's grappling hook. But the ziplines allow you to carry heavy objects across them, remain available indefinitely, allows each team member to use them, and makes it much harder for melee enemies to get their grubby claws on you. Each dwarf individually can handle any roadblock or rock block the cave throws at you, but it's when you combine all the tools from each dwarf that you really see Deep Rock Galactic come together. Even little things like being able to toss heavy objects to each other adds a huge layer of teamwork to what is ultimately a game with very simple objectives. It's why I have over 360 hours clocked in over the years, because I just keep coming back. Each mission is a test of teamwork, both in terms of combat and completing objectives. It's fun to work together. Combine this with the laser pointer allowing you to quickly ping objects and points of interest for your team, along with a callout from your dwarf. It seems like a small feature, but being able to give and receive information to and from your team without having to type or flip on your microphone really does make the teamwork that much easier and, in turn, more fun.
We're rich.
Sure, you could split up and work separately with your dwarves, or even do missions solo with your friendly neighborhood robot companion, but you'd be missing out on the camaraderie with your fellow dwarves. Deep Rock Galactic isn't great and has co-op, it's great because it's made for co-op.
We fight for rock and stone.
If I'm looking for a fun shooter to play with some buddies, well, I'm usually on Destiny. But I found that Deep Rock is a really reliable and fun time without the annoyances of other MMOs like time gating and fear of missing out. It's not trying to squeeze every last dollar from you. Every single season that has graced Deep Rock is still in the game, and you can still earn all the stuff that they've added with them. Every single update is free, and every mission is exciting because of the traversal and procedurally generated caves. It's the best co-op shooter since Left 4 Dead in my opinion, and I still find myself coming back to play a few missions every once in a while just for the fun of it. Just remember, if you don't rock and stone, you ain't coming home. And that's a threat.